Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in to the Minnesota Policy Call. Hopefully you're in the right place. You're not thinking we're talking about Kentucky. Maybe a little bit at the end if we have time. We'll give it a second for people to make their way into the webinar. Sit tight with us. I see we have some friends on the call. Hi, Chris. Give folks a few minutes to trickle in. Maybe start at 2 or 3. Till then we can all smile at each other. If anyone's feeling they need to work on their smile today, I feel like this is like the perfect time. Maybe this is even just a smile workshop. We should just scrap what we're doing today. Amazing, amazing, amazing. All right, we will kick off as people continue to make their way in. I'm sure we will see many folks that are excited to hear about all the things happening in Minnesota. So hello, everyone. My name is Noah Cordoba. I'm the Minnesota State Manager here at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. Super excited to have you join us for our National Policy Call series today, where we are deep diving into the amazing work that's happening within Minnesota to decarbonize buildings and the broader energy sector. And we're super excited to have a rockstar cast of panelists today to speak about the work that they're doing in the state. Backing up, for those who aren't familiar with BDC, we're a national coalition that's aiming to advance decarbonization of buildings across the sector, across stakeholders, and across groups of all kinds. We work with many stakeholders in the policy environments and industry environments with manufacturers and local governments and other advocates and things like that. And so we're super excited to be doing this work in a coalition format and really like collective power building. BDC is a coalition. Membership is free, so we encourage you to join us if you're able. You can learn more about joining BDC at buildingdecarb.org/join, where you can gather all of our resources and stay up to date on everything we're doing. And we're really, really happy to have that venue for folks to learn about building decarbonization. I want to take a moment to thank some few of our members who, oh no, we lost our slides.
Sorry,
But
I'm pulling him back up 1 second.
all
Keep
good.
going.
But I want to thank some of our Trailblazer members whose contributions to the organization make some of the work that we're doing possible. These members work very closely with us in partnership and provide dues to the organization. And I'll show you some of their amazing logos in a brief moment as they pop up on the screen.
Right. Logos now.
Beautiful. Look at those logos. I can't think of any better logos, except of course for the people on this call. So thank you so much to our Trailblazer members for all the work they do to support our work. And I want to flag an upcoming event that we have. So I invite you all to join us next Thursday, May 30th, 10 a.m. PT, 1 p.m. ET, where BDC will be presenting the Node Collective. For those who aren't familiar, the Node Collective stands for National Open Data for Electrification. It's a collective nonprofit alliance creating the most comprehensive and up-to-date repository of every residential electrification program in the nation, with the goal to make that open and accessible to everyone, so that we can, facilitate more information sharing and tool development and dissemination of the incentives that we know are really crucial in this energy transition. This webinar is going to be presented by the co-founding partners of the collective, Eli Technologies, BDC, Rewiring America, North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, and RMI, and talk about the progress to date within the collective, the roadmap, and how this initiative is spurring market innovation. So we really welcome you to join us there and hope you can make it. A few logistics for the webinar today. Everyone's muted for now. And during the Q&A session followed by our panel presentations, you'll have the opportunity to raise your hand, ask your question via chat, or we'll be taking note of questions throughout the webinar in the chat as well to ask back to our panelists. So if you ask it in the chat during the presentations because it's hot on your mind, promise we'll try to get back to it. The webinar is being recorded. It'll be placed in our resource library, and We'll be sharing that out later this week for attendees. So I'll start by introducing the folks that we have on the call today and giving them some moments to talk and then open that up for the discussion. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. Pete Wyckoff on the left here is the Assistant Commissioner of Federal and State Energy Initiatives at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, where he leads work in the state connecting crucial state and federal program opportunities towards a clean energy economy-wide, not just buildings. So he's really, really broad and amazing work. Carolina Ortiz is the Associate Executive Director at COPAL, where she leads life-changing community and environmental justice initiatives for under-resourced and underrepresented communities in Minnesota. So I'm really, really excited for you to hear about the work her and her team lead. And then Aurora Vautrin is the Legislative and Political Director for 100%, where she leads campaigns across the state and at the Capitol, pushing forward clean energy initiatives and the policies that make them real and accessible and really exciting. So wonderful to have you all today. We'll get started. We'll jump right into it, and I'll kick it off to Pete to tell us all about things at Department of Commerce.
Yeah, thank you. Noah, can you all hear me? Sound good?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
All right, excellent. So thanks for having me today, and thanks everybody for taking time out during your lunch hour here. As was just said, I'm Pete Wyckoff. I am Assistant Commissioner for Federal and State Energy Initiatives at the Department of Commerce here in Minnesota. Minnesota is one of two states that has its energy department essentially inside of its Department of Commerce. I think Washington State's the other one. So we don't have a standalone energy department. And I am one of two assistant commissioners, work for a deputy commissioner, and the side of the operations that I'm in charge of is our programmatic side, and then we also have a regulatory side. So next slide, please. So I am pleased to report that Minnesota is a state and maybe definitely a leader in the upper Midwest, and I think a leader nationally, a state that takes climate action extremely seriously, and also a state that is couching that climate action in the framework of we need to have a just and equitable transition. It needs to be a transition that, of course, leads to energy reliability throughout the transition. It is a state that also endorses sort of the national model of we need to make sure that the careers supported by this energy transition are real careers that provide the sort of jobs that communities can be built around. So within that context, Minnesota has a climate action framework, which is a process that is led by the governor's office. And then we also have some laws. And I want to just quickly go over some of our climate goals that come out of the climate action framework and also the law. Out of our climate action framework, we have a goal that by 2030, we will weatherize a quarter of all dwellings where occupants earn 50% or less of the state median income. By 2035, we'll reduce emissions from existing buildings by 50% compared to that standard 2005 benchmark. And now we're moving from goals to law. Last year, we passed a carbon-free standard for our electric sector, that by 2040, all of Minnesota's electricity will be carbon-free. And also law, but with slightly less teeth. By 2050, we will be at net zero emissions as an economy-wide entity for the state of Minnesota. And that, of course, includes buildings. Within commerce, we are also pushing a view of how to do this that takes into account equity and pushing the goal of by 2030, 80% of Minnesotans will have an energy burden less than 5%. And I'll talk about that a little more in one slide. Next slide. So by energy burden, what do we mean? We mean what do you pay for your energy costs as a household divided by household income. And for a state, the average energy burden is a little less than 3%. But there are places in the state where it can be much higher and is often much higher. And there are certain factors that go with that increased energy burden. This is not unique to Minnesota. If we look at energy burden and we look at how is the home heated, we're a cold climate, natural gas heating corresponds with substantially lower energy burden than delivered fuels. This here is the example of propane. So delivered fuels are more expensive and a primary cause of high energy burden. Next slide. And we can look at energy burden distribution across the state. There's our dear state of Minnesota. Has a new flag this week. I should have put that on the slide. Everybody should check it out. We have a great new flag. Anyway, darker colors means higher energy burden. If you don't know Minnesota, about half the population, a little more, lives in a metro area that is in the eastern middle part of the state. But in the more rural parts of the state, we see more delivered fuels, and that corresponds with higher energy burden. Of course, everywhere there are pockets of folks with high energy burden. Next slide. Energy burden can be reduced in two ways, of course. You can raise income, and you can do that a variety of ways, including through direct energy assistance, or as we're starting to experiment with income-based rate making for utilities. So that's really taking that energy cost divided by household income. And if we want to think about it that way, that's raising the income. The other thing you can do is try to reduce the cost that a household incurs in meeting their energy needs. And that's where we're focused in our Office of Energy Affordability, which is one of the two offices that report to me here at the Department of Commerce. And we do that across an entire scale from let's take the envelope of the house and let's get it ready to be improved, to a weatherization program. We have done the classic federal weatherization program has come out of the Department of Commerce for a long, long time. It is very well established and a very good program. And then we're moving increasingly into, can we get these energy savings and reduce energy burden and reduce emissions through electrification, and also through generation that's accessible, be it solar on the roof or community solar gardens or other ways of getting accessible generation to low-income Minnesotans, which can reduce their energy burden. All right, next slide. I'll spend most of my time here, and then I'll quickly move through the rest of the slides. This is a little confusing, but I think it's worth unpacking what we have and what we are doing here. So this is kind of the slide I just showed you, but on this slide, the maroon color is a Minnesota program, and the blue color is a federal program that we are standing up or passing through here at the Department of Commerce. And if we move from left to right on, I think that's right. If we move from one side of the screen to the other, we can see that, even to get into the federal weatherization program, there's often a lot of work that needs to be done in housing for low-income Minnesotans. Minnesota is tackling that with a pre-weatherization program that we are standing up. It was approved by the legislature. A lot of things were approved by the legislature last year. We kind of did our own little mini IRA here. So we're standing up a pre-weatherization state program to make more homes eligible for the federal weatherization program. And I have put the number of households we think we can serve on here, and that's an important metric. One rough calculation says there's about 500,000 homes in Minnesota that are, in theory, eligible for federal energy assistance, so LIHEAP. Not 500,000 that get it, but 500,000 that are eligible. And if you take that as a first cut, that gives you sort of the need out there for good, well-insulated homes that have lower energy costs. So you can see that we are making big strides. We're putting big money, but we're not going to move extremely rapidly in reducing the overall problem. But we do have this pre-weatherization program. Then we move into our classic weatherization program. That's the first of the middle columns there. We have our traditional weatherization that has gotten a boost, like everywhere else, through through a 5-year period through the bipartisan infrastructure law passed by the federal government, which is basically doubling our pace. But again, we're moving through a little sub 5,000 weatherizations, successful weatherizations a year, with a demand that is closer to 500,000. Then we are excited to be standing up within the Department of Commerce another couple of IRA-related programs, the Homes and HERE collective, the federal energy rebate programs out of the Inflation Reduction Act. They will serve a bunch of homes, and this will be great progress. But again, it will leave us with more to do. In that box, it shares with the far right column are two state programs that were explicitly passed as supplements to the Homes and HERE program, one for increasing the amount of money available for heat pumps and one for increasing the amount of money available for electric panel upgrades. So we have all that. That's basically what I just showed you on the last slide. We have other tools though. On the purple here, we interact with our regulatory unit in that we have energy conservation standards and utility obligations to meet them that yield benefits and rebates at the utility level for eligible homes. We're doing a lot of work related to building codes, which of course in the long term will be an important part of this. And we have something called the Natural Gas Innovation Act, which is aiding transition to a cleaner system from our gas system. And also, of course, that can include electrification. We, of course, like everyone else, have the IRA tax credits to build on top of. We have the usual limits on weatherization, electrification, on solar and storage. And then we're very pleased that we recently, the Department of Commerce received a $62 million Solar for All program, which, like everyone else, we working on getting low income solar to be more of a well-established thing. Not only did we get 62 million, but Minnesota tribes are sharing in a 3-state grant that's another 62 million. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in that space. Next slide. Nothing I said is going to scale completely to the problems. We're also thinking about how do we scale up even bigger. We are through the CPRG program going after with a bunch of partners, money to try to focus even more money into weatherization and electrification. We have a new state green bank that is also being stood up in Commerce and is very important to our plans here. Because what the Green Bank can do directly, and also because what the Green Bank can do as a state energy finance institution, or SEFI, to tap into co-lending with the DOE Loan Program Office, which has in its $400 billion of IRA loan authority, about $80 billion that states can tap into for co-lending through a state green bank. And we are looking for ways and projects to sort of scale up the things I mentioned on the last page. Next slide. We are thinking about these. I won't go into it in terms of how do we meet all these goals for low income, middle income, and upper income Minnesotans. We want to leave nobody behind in this race to get to net zero emissions in Minnesota, including buildings. Next slide. Of course, everybody wants to know, when are those energy rebates going to be available? I can tell you, not yet, but we were part of particularly on the HERE part, which is the electrification rebates, we were part of a DOE invited surge. So we're in the second cohort of states in terms of progress made to getting the rebates out the door. We submitted our initial HERE application on March 22nd. We are standing up with a planning vendor to get the program designs hammered out, and we will then be contracting for rebate implementation next. That doesn't mean we are done with stakeholder engagement. We are just starting, and we will be doing stakeholder engagement throughout the spring and summer as we work towards launching that program. Next slide. That's everything. I just said in a prettier form, but basically we hope to roll out our HERE rebates by the end of the year. That is a tough, even though we're in the second cohort, that is a tough set of deadlines to meet. So just like everywhere else, people are saying, where's my rebate? And we're saying it's complicated and we were working very hard to get it out. Next slide is it for me, and I will shut up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pete. Wonderful to hear about all of the breadth of work that's happening at Commerce and the work that you're leading. So thank you so much for all of
Thanks.
it. We'll now welcome Carolina Ortiz from COPAL to speak. And I hope you guys have been practicing your smiles because we'll be looking at each other.
Thank you, Noah. Well, it's awesome to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I don't have fancy presentations, but I do have awesome links that are hopefully helpful as I share a little bit more about the work that we are doing here at COPAL and the work with cumulative impact. So I'll put in the chat the link just to our website. And part of that is just to share a little bit more about me and COPAL. I'm Carolina Ortiz, Associate Director. I've been with the organization since 2018, which is when we started this amazing work to improve the quality of life of Latin American families, but also acknowledging that the work that we do impacts everybody who calls Minnesota home. And part of that work has also been addressing immediate needs that our community has, but also questioning why we are in that cycle of need and finding solutions to, again, improve our quality of life. So it's been amazing being part of this journey and being part of the team. Within our environmental justice work, we have 4 big buckets. I call them buckets of work. And these are just the big fancy names, right, that we all see and hear, which green jobs, just transition, internal and external migration, and then cumulative impacts. Within those 4 buckets of work, we really have several vehicles of how we get this done. Part of that is through our worker center. So we have community members that come to our worker center. We connect them to various resources, opportunities, but we also utilize that face-to-face interaction to talk about other resources that maybe they are not aware of. A big thing that we did here initially were some of the weatherization programs that they just had no idea that existed. So being able to be that connection has been very important. We also do a lot of student engagement. We do delegation trips. We have committees led by our members. We also have citizenship classes, which have been key as far as like getting people to not only pass the test, become citizens, but most importantly, how can they be engaged in our state and in the work that we're doing. And then I say finally because there's a little bit more to it, but within the environmental justice, we also have our monthly outdoor events, which we started implementing a little bit over a year now. And the goal of that was to have fun, enjoy the spaces that we have, acknowledge the barriers of being able to enjoy the outdoors, lack of transportation, the cost, not only the cost of being there, but also the cost of equipment. So we started having outdoor events with partners, one so that the families could feel comfortable. We could show them new events or things that they could participate in, create communities through just having fun, but also inserting some of the more, I would say, tougher to discuss conversations around the IRA, around what are cumulative impacts, what can be done. So really finding creative ways to reach community members. I don't know if I'm able to see everybody, but would love to know, and I'm assuming people have like an understanding, but everybody aware of the cumulative impacts law that passed last legislative session? I see a lot of nodding. Okay, sweet.
I
So
think a little context could probably be helpful for folks on what cumulative impacts is.
Of course. I'm going to put the other link in the chat, and this is for our coalition work. If you scroll down, there is a button that says read more about the law here. It's an awesome one-pager that was put together by the team that explains what are cumulative impacts, what do they do, and then how does this affect you? So part of the work, and I mean, we are third in the nation. New York, New Jersey, and now Minnesota has a law that was passed to acknowledge how do we support or understand what permits are being given for groups to come into communities. Can an analysis be done? How can community be engaged? Oh, thank you, Noah. So yes, that is the one pager. In case anybody wants more information or wants to get connected, that is the page where we do all of our updates. A lot of that work, and I will be humbling myself really quickly, but a lot of that work last year was also understanding like what we did or did not know, and acknowledging that coalition work is really difficult. I mean, we're all humans, right? It's never as easy as it's said or put down on paper. So last year with the trifecta that we had, it was a regrounding of the coalition, who's present, who's not, what relationships have we built, what relationships have we not built. And I think it was a pretty fast track of, okay, this is where we are and this is what we need in order to get this passed. So we relied heavily on other organizations, partners, community leaders that had been doing this work for many years before we started engaging, understanding, the governor's position on this, the various departments, the various agencies, MPCA, Department of Commerce, and just trying to understand how we all come together, understanding that at the end of the day, we all want similar goals or have similar goals. But the question is, how do we get there, and how do we have conversations around some of the pain points regarding cumulative impacts? And I know I'm going pretty fast, but again, check out the link. It is pretty awesome and it explains everything in detail. But part of the question, and as I was talking with Noah and a few other folks prior to this conversation, are what were some of the challenges? What were some of the things that made it successful? How do we get here? And we've been talking about this as a coalition, processing how did we get here? What do we do? Acknowledging all of the work that was put forward. And one of the things, or the main thing that I think supported us getting here, was a multi-year funding. As a coalition, understanding how do we, with acknowledging that we didn't have all of the understanding with policy, with the tech language, having the funding allowed us to hire additional team members, and additional folks through the coalition to really have knowledge and understand how we can then get more information as needed. There was also a lot of support that the funding provided to be able to do community organizing, community engagement. A big piece of the work was, one, understanding it as a coalition, but then also understanding it at the level of team members within our organizations, and then how are we presenting this to community members. Part of that was having very simple community conversations, doing some of the events, understanding what are cumulative impacts, why should it matter, and why should you be involved. So first thing was the funding. The second ingredient for success, I would say, would be the maintaining an effective coalition. We established the HEMIS principles to guide our work. We made sure that we had clear vision and goals. And then we also had regular evaluations, acknowledging like our strengths, our weaknesses, and how do we hold each other accountable through this process. So again, that's much easier said than done, but I think that's part of what made it so successful. The other piece that I've already mentioned was really establishing key relationships, understanding that sometimes even though conversations can be difficult, it's important to have the conversations and to open up those spaces. And then finally, the community decision-making process. Part of the work that we were doing was making sure that there would be a community process involved in this law. But as the law passed, the definition of community decision-making process is the least defined. And this takes me back to some of the work that we're doing internally, but also with our partners. We have to make sure that we continue to work with our community members on what are cumulative impacts, and why is it important to stay engaged. It's not easy, and I recalling also my own experience. I remember when I initially started understanding how to pass a law, what needs to be done. I didn't understand, I'm like, okay, so much work has been done. The law is passed. So we're good, right? Like that's it, that was successful. But then understanding the rulemaking piece of it, understanding so much of the details get done after the law is passed is what we've been trying to also get community members to understand. And in this particular case, we have 3 years for rulemaking with cumulative impacts. And that makes it even more challenging because how do we convince, or how do we make sure that we continue to engage or make community members feel like it's worth, participating, and just keeping in mind that it is 3 years. How do we do that? So that is a challenge that we had ahead of us. But I think with the work that we're doing, we're on the right path. And it's just a matter of how do we continue to build community power and just community awareness around this work. With all of that said, I know we'll have time for questions at the end, but just some of the few things that the team and I have been processing for this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That's amazing to hear about all the work on cumulative impacts in the campaign and some of the insights that you got from it. We'll jump ship over to Aurora Vautrin to walk us through all things legislative, all things policy. Thank you, Aurora.
Wonderful. Thank you, Noah. I'm excited to be here. My name is Aurora Vautrin. I'm the legislative director for 100%, and I am here to talk to you about the state of play at the Minnesota Legislature for building decarbonization. And I am live from a borrowed office in our state capitol building. Session is in full swing and nearing its end at the moment. So I'm excited to be here with you all to talk about where things are at and where we will soon be. You can go to the next slide, please. So 100% started in 2018 as a campaign to decarbonize our electricity sector. We built a cross-sector, statewide, multiracial, intersectional campaign to create an equitable, clean energy future for everyone in Minnesota. And last session, we passed 100% carbon-free energy by 2040 with the help of many of our partners. And now we've joined with 2 of those partners, both Isaiah and Unidos, to take on residential building decarbonization. The mission that we're on together, we call Building the Future, and I will put a link to our website in the chat for folks who are interested. And you can go to the next slide. So why is our focus on residential buildings now? So we know that buildings as a whole are over 1/5 of Minnesota's total greenhouse gas emissions. You can see this chart is a breakdown of sector by sector. Last session, right, we tackled the electricity sector. We also did a whole lot on decarbonizing our transportation sector, partly through a $927 million per biennium metro area sales tax for transit, which we are very proud of and will make a big difference in our state. Next slide. And residential building emissions are a big part of that, and they are sizable and they're rising. But they're also really hard to decarbonize. Like getting into people's homes to decarbonize them is a huge exercise in trust, let alone like having the structure and the infrastructure to do it. So we believe that the approach needs to be really grounded in the communities that we're trying to decarbonize. Next slide. And I promise you, I will get into the policies that we're anxiously awaiting the fate of here. But first, in order to understand where we're at, we're going to have to back up a little bit to give you a picture of how we got here. So I know Carolina mentioned the trifecta that we had starting in the election of November 2022. So we elected a DFL trifecta with a 1-seat Senate majority. We went into the session of 2023, the budget year, with a $17.5 billion surplus. It was a historic legislative session, and we had huge climate wins. And then we came into this session, and it was a bonding year. And the revenue forecast shows that there's a possible deficit in the tails, which means there is very, very little money to spend in our state. We were up against a lot of people who felt like we did all we needed to last session, that we should pass a bonding bill and go home. But we fought back against that. We went steadily ahead, and we're making real progress on new solutions, particularly thermal energy networks. Republicans began to delay tactics as we neared the deadlines that you can see March 22nd and April 19th. They started to do a lot of filibustering, particularly in the House. But both bodies were keeping up and keeping on track, and we were moving things along and towards the finish line. And then April 22nd, we had a DFL state senator who was arrested and charged with first-degree burglary during a short legislative recess. And if you remember from the beginning, we have a one-seat majority in the Senate, but that means in the whole legislature, right? So that brings us sort of to today, where after today, we are going to have 4 legislative days left. All bills have to be passed by Monday, the 20th, this coming Monday at 7 a.m. Most committees are still conferencing their omnibus bills between the two bodies and need to agree to matching language before they can do final passage. We still don't know if we're going to get a bonding bill. They have not come to an agreement on that yet. And there are motions every day to delay, and it has put quite a speed bump in our session and our progress. We have to adjourn by May 20th. So we know that it may be a huge year for building decarbonization, specifically thermal energy networks in our state, or it might not be. But we know that if it isn't, it's not because there wasn't the excitement or interest was lacking, or because their incredible value to help us decarbonize isn't recognized. And we've stayed really hopeful and diligent in a session that many deemed a wash before it even started and have pushed through every roadblock so far. So we're going to keep doing everything that we can until the constitutionally mandated end. And then in November of 2024, the Minnesota State House is going to be up for re-election. And we could either keep the trifecta, or we could lose the House and no longer have the sort of streamlined and exciting movement forward with our trifecta. It's not impossible for us to keep moving ahead with divided government. It complicates things a little bit, but we are committed and hopeful. We're still working really hard to make sure that our stuff gets through this session, and will continue regardless of how that election in November of 2024 goes. So now you can go to the next slide. Now that we have some context, I want to talk a little bit about what we could win in the next couple of days. So I'm going to highlight the bills that we've been leading on or working on with our allies, but I'm going to also drop in the chat a full breakdown of all of the bills that have to do with thermal energy networks moving in this state to date. So there are 8 of them. Go to the next slide. So the first bill that I'm going to talk about is a thermal energy deployment work group. This bill has been led on by our friends at GeoExchange, and we've worked with them to make sure that the results of this work group get brought to the Public Utilities Commission so that we can open the report up for public comment. So the thermal energy deployment work group is going to look at how we actually utilize thermal energy networks as a state on a utility scale. It's going to get all of the people in the state of Minnesota that need to be thinking about and talking to each other about thermal energy networks on a neighborhood scale, talking to each other and like figuring out the answers to these really hard questions. And then next slide. And then a bill that we have been working really hard on ourselves is a site suitability study. So we want to look at the whole state like we did for wind and solar. These pictures are of a similar study that our state did to figure out what the best places for solar energy was in our state. And looking at a list of considerations that are important. So, you know, how far from the water table you are, density, but also existing built infrastructure, and considering whether a place is an area of environmental justice. Next slide. I know that Pete mentioned the Natural Gas Innovation Act. One of our strategies is a bill that opens up NGIA and requires more spending on thermal energy network pilots. So the Natural Gas Innovation Act passed with bipartisan support in 2021. The law allows utilities to rate recover spending on pilot programs for technologies that could be carbon reducing. So to participate, they have to submit innovation plans for approval to the Public Utilities Commission, meeting certain requirements, some based on size. And in their first plans, they were required to spend at least 50% of that on renewable natural gas. And they had a maximum percentage that they were allowed to spend on geothermal. So our bill requires that in future innovation plans, our largest utilities have to spend at least 15% of their innovation money on thermal energy networks. And you can see here, these are breakdowns of two of our state's largest utilities' first innovation plans, where they are both planning to do network geothermal pilots, which is great. But we are really excited about continuing to build on that and having them do more, right? Because this is all about how we scale. We can only learn so much from one pilot. We got to keep building. So next slide. And then these are some more opportunities for us to accelerate pilots on thermal energy networks. So we've got proposals for $2.5 million in local government planning grants, so that local governments can look at what it would look like if they were going to do network geothermal in their locality. And then $1.5 million for geothermal heat exchange system rebates. I believe that this is focusing on commercial buildings. And then next slide. This one is really exciting. So Sabathani is a beloved Minneapolis community center. It actually was formerly the school that Prince went to. That's a fun Minnesota fact. But they currently heat with giant, inefficient, and expensive boilers. And funding to get them their own network geothermal system will mean that they can provide even more really important programming that they do in South Minneapolis. And then next. So the Rise Up Center is not a thermal energy network building, but we wanted to make sure that we included this here because it's really important when we're thinking about workforce development and training. So this facility would literally be a place where people would be trained to do things like decarbonize our buildings, and is a huge opportunity, an investment in both BIPOC communities, but also in the climate reduction as a whole. Next slide. So that's 2024. The thing that we have our sights set on for 2025 is what we're calling the Minnesota Home Improvement Office. So we want to create a place that is in charge of thinking about how we decarbonize all of our buildings, all of our residential buildings as a whole, right? We have state statute goals on when we are going to decarbonize by, but we don't have like a plan on how we actually get there. So this office would create a front door for homeowners to all of the programs, the really awesome opportunities from the IIJA and the IRA, as well as our state's own opportunities for homeowners to decarbonize their houses, all in one place. And it would really help us get closer to our state goals on decarbonization. So we are continuing to build and look towards the future, and are excited to continue to work with the Building Decarbonization Coalition on all of it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Aurora, and a wonderful round of applause silently to our panelists for these amazing presentations. I now want to open it up to some Q&A from folks in the audience. What questions do you have? What things did you hear that spurred excitement and spurred curiosity? I'd love to dig into it. We have some questions that were asked throughout that I can start us off with. I think one in particular from Chris. Chris, did you want to reply? I think you had a few in the chat.
Yeah, no problem. Hello, everybody. So I'm trying to, my question is, what is Minnesota doing to educate, if there's any incentives or anything like that revolving around commercial kitchens and commercial buildings? I heard a lot about residential, but I just wanted to hear specifically about the commercial sector, because that's going to be the most difficult to convert.
I can take a first stab at that. So you're correct. It's going to be very difficult to convert, though we have a long history of PACE programs that are well established here and other means of trying to tackle the commercial building side. On the commercial building side, in the 2023 legislative session, which I think you're getting the picture, was sort of monumental. One of the things that passed was a building benchmarking program, which we are standing up here at Commerce. That I think is going to feed into two things. One, it's very much related to our continued and ramping up with IRA grant funding and IIJA grant funding work on building codes. And also, I don't want to get ahead of the legislature, but there is a strong interest in building performance standard legislation. And, it's not going to get across the finish line this year, but it's something that we at Commerce, in terms of like being ready and being able to provide technical assistance to the legislature, are thinking a lot about, in case that's where we move. And I think some of the advocates here are definitely going to be pushing to move in that direction. I'll let them speak to that. We don't have, just to get the other part before I stop, I can't think of things that we have there specifically about commercial kitchens, but maybe that is that is an area. We got a lot of programs that
Well, if you ever need any help, let us know.
So I'll shut up.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Pete. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity to do more work on commercial kitchens and the commercial food service sector in Minnesota. I think there's a lot of great examples from across the country on how folks are developing incentive programs to support that industry. So really, really amazing question. I have a question that maybe for either like Aurora or Carolina, whoever feels compelled, maybe both of you. What do you think some of the components of your outreach and coalition building have made a lot of the work you've been able to do in the state really successful so far? I know it's a big question.
I can go first. I will say that the amount of folks that have reached out to their legislators, to the chairs of the committees, to the administration, specifically asking for action on network geothermal and thermal energy networks, is a huge reason that we have as many bills that we have still on the table. And I'll just tell like a quick little piece of that. You heard about our NGIA changes as one of our big policy priorities. At the beginning of session, the House was all for it. They were like, yep, we'll hear the whole bill. And the Senate said, oh, I don't know that we need to open up NGIA. I don't know that we're going to hear that bill. I don't know how other stakeholders would feel about it. They heard a little bit of pushback initially from CenterPoint Energy, our largest utility in the state. And because of the amount of public pressure and the amount of constituents contacting their representatives, the Senate heard the whole bill. They heard the whole thing. And they originally weren't going to do that. So it is the work that we're doing literally would not be possible without the folks in their communities who are paying attention to what's happening on climate and happening at the legislature, who aren't paid to do it, but just care and have really partnered with us and become leaders in the legislature. So yeah, I think that was a great question, Noah.
And I completely agree with all of that. Just to add or expand, I think for the work that we've been doing, the very specific clear asks or the very clear understanding of what is needed, but also transparency as far as like what do we still need, I think has been really important. Social media, using it as a tool as well, understanding like how do we reach our community members. I mentioned our Environmental Justice Committee, which is one of our various committees that we have within the organization. But within the work that we do, they decide what bills we support, what key issues are important to them, and they lead the work that we do. And that has been really key for us because they're also the leaders that are showing up in these spaces, testifying. They are the faces to their communities that also encourage other people, neighbors, friends, family to also participate in the work. So they are definitely key and just a big part of why we are successful in the first place. And of course, along with the other partners and organizations that, as I mentioned before, have been doing and putting in the work for so many years.
That's amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions from folks on the call? Anything that you're curious about from the presentations, thinking about legislative policy, thinking about like environmental justice and community-based work, or the plethora and breadth of programs coming out of commerce?
Quick question on incentive programs. Are there any incentive programs being developed, and are they being developed in conjunction with the State Energy Office and the utility programs, or rather the utility companies, or how is that going to be tackled?
Yeah, Pete, do you want to take them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big, broad question. I mean, we can look at just like the small question, which isn't small at all, of like, how would we support, say, heat pump conversion? That is something that, is a challenge, particularly in Minnesota's climate. But in terms of supporting folks who want to move in the direction of installing a heat pump, we have a bunch of things we can stack. We can stack utility incentives, which are partially driven by our laws requiring increased energy efficiency every year. We can stack the tax credits, which are from the IRA. We can stack the upcoming state and federal heat pump tax credits, so that when you stack all those on top of each other in a home that is inhabited by a income eligible Minnesota family, they really do make a considerable incentive package. And one of the challenges will be making sure that people are, and we're working on this, are getting the view of like, what are all of the things available for me to make this move, and how do they work together, and how do I get signed up for everything, hopefully all at once. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Really, really amazing and big question from Brian in the chat. Brian, did you want to verbalize any of this, or I'm happy to read it off?
Yeah, I mean, I could verbalize this. I work for a consulting firm. We're actually one of the leading firms in the country on network geothermal systems, and so we're involved in a number of pilot projects out east. But wondering where this, policy is going to take Minnesota. How is Minnesota engaging with, experts in the field, bringing together those folks to the table to have those discussions to make sure, number one, we get policy right. Number two, that we're really doing what's in the best interest of utilities and the consumers. So just curious as to what those discussions are. How are we bringing the right people to the table?
Brian, that's a great question, and I will start. But there's a lot more, and I would love to connect as well, because this is the thing that we are like really thinking about and focusing on. And I think it's one of the reasons why the PUC work group on thermal energy network deployment is and has been one of the most popular bills this session on the topic. Because it will literally bring together the people who build these systems, labor unions, our utilities, our environmental stakeholders, to sit around a table together and like start to figure out how to deploy these. I think, I will not even start or begin to claim to be an expert on any of this. And one of the reasons why we love the Building Decarbonization Coalition so much is because of their technical expertise and support. But we are really interested in making sure that we have everyone who has any interest or say at the table figuring this out with us, and are always interested in connecting with more. So thank you for your awesome questions, and we're working on it.
I might add a couple things. The city of Rochester is getting a lot of press in Minnesota for moving towards district geothermal. I'll also note the Minnesota State Green Bank, which, as I mentioned much earlier, something we've been standing up, but is rapidly becoming an independent entity. Gave out its first loan about a month ago. It was to put in a district geothermal system in a new low-income housing and mixed-use development in St. Paul, Minnesota. There is the challenge that there's this huge IRA potential benefit for these systems from the direct pay tax credits, but you can't get the tax credit till you've completed the project. So that's why our first loan from MnCFR Green Bank was aimed at just this problem for geothermal, and it's a bridge loan. It will be paid back out of the tax credit reimbursement.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Aurora and Pete. Looking at the time, I'm going to start wrapping this up, but thank you again so much to all of our speakers, Aurora, Carolina, and Pete, for all of the amazing time today, of course, in the middle of the session, and all the insights that you brought to cover the work that you're doing. So really, really appreciative of you. Major claps and kudos and thank yous. Quick wrap up and housekeeping. Reminder that we'll be sending out the slides that we presented on today and the recording later this week, and then that will live in perpetuity on our website alongside all of our other policy call recordings and notes and things like that. And we thank you so much for joining us today and hope that you can join us for our next one. We're never going to stop talking state policy. So we hope you'll be with us and keep practicing those smiles. Thank you all. Have a great Tuesday.